In the last video, I said that Metal Gear Solid was a totally unfettered work of flawless genius. I also mentioned something about it being more like a movie than a video game. And maybe I said that because it kinda is. The previous Metal Gear game had some lengthy sequences of dialogue-driven story, but maybe only 3 or 4 of them. The whole game was also viewed from a fixed bird's-eye 2D angle, and the dialogue was delivered with text messages by little pixelated heads. It was a good deal more cinematic and wordy and awesome compared to other games of 1990, but it doesn't take long to see that the 8 years of transitioning from 2D to 3D makes the next game so visually different from the previous one that it doesn't even look like a sequel. Maybe that's why they started a new numbering sequence at the third Metal Gear game. For starters, telling a story in 3D space meant that Kojima could finally make use of cinematography and tell the story by using a language that isn't delivered textually or verbally. Note how the cutscene camera uses Dutch angles to communicate nausea and uneasiness, and how it closes up on characters to evoke intimacy. The 3D camera works hard to make these shots aesthetically pleasing, and these 3D character models are capable of flexibly posing for these shots from any angle. Their speech is also delivered in sync with the music, and sometimes the camera reinforces what they're saying by focusing on specific props. Speaking of which, another big deal was the voice acting. When these characters talk, you now have to look them in the face and listen. Sure, their faces kind of look like potatoes, but it's a much more organic way of communicating things to the player than through text boxes. Except when this happens... Okay, so the codec cutscenes are pretty much text boxes, but at least they're efficient. The longest conversations in the game happen between, well, 2 pixelated heads who read their text messages out loud, and it mostly serves as a way to ensure that a story as large and detailed as this one can get snuck in there without the developers having to go to the effort of scripting out even more big, elaborate cutscenes. Again, it's not effective, elegant, or consistent, especially since way in the beginning you actually have a codec conversation outside of the black screen, but it's efficient enough to work. But having cutscenes, vocal conversations, and cinematography also means that these characters get to act. You get a good sense of these guys' personalities just by how they deliver lines, and for the most part, the game ends up being a collage of previous influences because of it. Solid Snake himself is a suave ladies' man spy who's also a bandana-wearing homicidal gunslinger. For his personality, Kojima assembled together an equal mix of James Bond, Rambo, and Kurt Russell. It's true, Snake was named after Snake Plissken from Escape from New York, and when you go back and watch this movie and then play this movie, the resemblance between the two Snakes is uncanny, right down to how they both have conversations by asking questions with incomplete sentences.
About an hour ago, a small jet went down inside New York City. The president was on board.
President of what?
What soldiers?
24 hours, huh?
Video game players, huh?
I don't like needles.
What's wrong? You don't like shots?
So the story is a pastiche of poppy, pulpy, pedestrian entertainment influences, and it's also somewhat of a new spin-off series based off the old Metal Gears with a new audience, new platform, and a new numbering scheme and story. For the most part, you don't need to know what happened in the MSX games to get into this one, it's mostly explained for you. However, it still had to deal with a bunch of backstory baggage that happened in Metal Gear 2. You see, Metal Gear 2 was made in 1990, but was supposed to take place in 1999. There was still 1 year of Soviet Union left, and this is why the game has all those references to the Berlin Wall and the Cold War still happening in 1999. It also takes place in a kind of utopian version of 1999, where the entire world, despite still being divided between 2 giant competing superpowers, throws away their nuclear arsenal, and then everyone gets really surprised when Big Boss shows up with his. So then we have Metal Gear Solid, which takes place in 2005 even though the game was made in 1998. This lets it get away with including all sorts of fantasy future tech like holograms, nanomachines, virtual reality, stealth camo, cyborg ninjas, and giant robot dinosaurs. Apparently there's also this huge army of genome soldiers running around who have their DNA rearranged to make them better soldiers, which would sound far-fetched if it actually wasn't. So where does all the backstory baggage from Metal Gear 2 fit into this game? To be fair, not all of it does, because it's retconned. Now here's a brief word on retconning. To put it simply, a retcon, or retroactive continuity, is what happens when fiction authors contradict the continuity of previous works set in the same universe. For Metal Gear fans, the term quickly came to prominence shortly after the release of Metal Gear Solid 4, but the games have been doing this all the way since the beginning. In the included summation of previous games, Metal Gear Solid makes no mention of the whole world abandoning their nukes. In fact, the game goes out of its way to establish that the world is in just the opposite situation. They also have this hilarious mistranslation of Holly's name. But the biggest glaring contradiction of all is the supposed Darth Vader moment that happened in the last game.
Wait.
There was a man who said he was my father.
Where is he?
Dead. By my own hand.
It happened in Zanzibar 6 years ago.
No, it didn't!
Was Big Boss really your father?
That's what he said.
No, he didn't! You're just making that up because it's dramatic! The whole Metal Gear Solid series starts and ends with the life and death of Big Boss, with his prequel games taking place in Cold War jungle settings and the sequel games having you play as his clones in cyberpunky settings. It's like we're expected to know beforehand that Solid Snake was told that he was Big Boss's cloned son, but in the first two games, none of that actually happened. Big Boss is just a bad guy without any real familial relation or sympathetic motives to the hero. He just does villainous shit cause that's what he feels his role is. Until this game. This series is a clusterfuck. But I'm trying to make a fake fictional timeline to keep track of its fake fictional continuity. What does happen in this game is that the Foxhound unit from the previous games goes rogue 6 years later and takes over a secretive Area 51-esque facility in the middle of nowhere, also known as Alaska. Liquid Snake is leading them, and the Pentagon puts Colonel Roy Campbell on the case, who decides that the only state of matter that can counter Liquid is solid. He sends in Solid Snake, who eventually finds out that Campbell was actually manipulated into sending him there because the Pentagon stationed Campbell's niece and later somehow daughter there, knowing she would be taken hostage and that Snake, who is Campbell's favorite sneaky commando, would be the only sneaker capable of sneaking his way all the way to these bad guys to assassinate them. On the way, Snake runs into a lonely anime nerd about to get sliced by a cyborg ninja, who turns out to be a reanimated Gray Fox who's out for some kind of weird not revenge. Almost everyone Snake rescues dies mysteriously, except for the anime nerd, Colonel's daughter niece, and the bad guys who would make good boss fights. Eventually Snake and Meryl get captured and you find out that Liquid Snake is Solid Snake's twin brother. Never saw that one coming. You find out that your medic has been lying to you all along and that she was following orders from the Pentagon to inject you with the deadly assassin virus that you were supposed to accidentally infect all the bad guys with to help the government cover up the fact that they were developing this big evil robotic superweapon. She complied because in the last game you killed Gray Fox, who saved her life as a child, and now she's out for revenge, but she kinda changes her mind or something by the end. You also find out that Cocky Sunglasses was actually the bad guy all along, and that he had manipulated you into activating Metal Gear yourself because he could never get a hold of Meryl's keycard. When Solid and Liquid are fighting it off, Gray Fox shows up again and sacrifices himself to help you blow up the Metal Gear and kill Liquid. But once that happens, the government no longer has any big secret world-destroying superweapon to cover up, except for you and Liquid. So the Secretary of Defense kicks the Colonel out of there and calls you personally to say that they're on their way to deny the existence of the whole incident by way of stealth bombers and bunker busters. After all, since they can't get Metal Gear itself, the next best thing is its test data, which was stored on a disk that Ocelot stole because he was actually working undercover for the president the whole time! Liquid reveals that both he and Snake were clones of Big Boss, and that Liquid had set up the whole insurrection to give soldiers like him a purpose in the totally safe and peaceful utopian world of 2005. He was trying to follow in Big Boss's footsteps, and was particularly angry because in order to create Snake, who had all of Big Boss's dominant genes, they had to give him the recessive ones, and also abort a whole bunch of other clones who weren't up to snuff. But with his plans all sorts of screwed up, and the government on their way to blow up all the evidence, he has nothing left to lose and dies again after wrestling you on top of the destroyed robot. So Snake and Meryl, or Otacon if you couldn't press buttons fast enough earlier, race out of the exploding base just in time to see that Liquid is still not dead and is driving after them. Everyone's car crashes and Liquid blows up and dies again, except, wait, no, he doesn't. Okay, well, maybe he does die? But he didn't die from the rocket launchers or from a 12-story fall or from hundreds of bullets or from an exploding car crash. Nope. He died from the assassination virus, the one that Snake was carrying, and since he has the same genetic code as Solid Snake, that means that Solid Snake's gonna be a target of it too. Meryl tells Snake not to think about it, and Naomi tells you not to believe in genetic destiny, and that people have a whole lot more control over themselves than they give themselves credit for. At the last minute, Colonel manages to arrest the Secretary of Defense and call off the airstrike, and so everyone takes a long, quiet, introspective ride off into the sunset. It's really goddamn difficult to concisely summarize the plot of this game. I left out so much shit, so much happens that it's impossible to know everything that's going on even the first few times. Even the sequel went out of its way to retroactively re-explain what happened, specifically with regard to what the president was doing this whole time. It's a complicated, convoluted plot, but not without a wealth of tiny little details that show that it wasn't all being made up as it was written. Ever notice how Snake says his arm hurts after you have to repeatedly mash the torture button? Or how Ocelot wears an American cowboy outfit and names himself after an American cat despite supposedly being Russian? Or how they talk about turning Metal Gear off with the PAL card right in front of Snake because they know he's listening in? The list goes on. It's really impressive just how meticulously detailed this plot is, and that's really the defining feature of the game. Only problem is that it seems like they spent a whole lot less time thinking about the game supporting that plot. After all, a lot of this game's big set-piece moments and its overall pacing were just recycled from the last one. You've got a fight with a mysterious ninja who's actually a dead character from the previous game. You shoot down a Hind D with Stinger missiles. Both games take place across 3 multi-floor buildings with short outdoor transitions between them. In the first building of both games, there's an arsenal basement with a very similar floor plan. You eventually catch up to a woman soldier wearing a disguise and give her a talk in the bathroom. Then she gets shot down at a choke point shortly after. Then you climb up 10 flights of stairs with infinite guards chasing after you for no reason, presumably to think about the girl getting shot down. Then you get ambushed by 4 dudes in an elevator. Just before the end of both games, you have a fist fight with a big bad, and even after the final boss fight, you and the love interest sprint out of some underground corridors just in the nick of time. It might be illogical for me to say something like this in retrospect, but would I be wrong for thinking that this game played better in 2D than 3D? I mean, don't hate on me too hard. The story's awesome. The story's timeless and amazing and genius and all that. It's just, I don't think the game attached to it would have been enough to sell the package by itself. As a disclaimer, know that I played through this game twice during the month before making this video, and both times I noticed something weird. This game is hard as hell, but only for the first third or so. To word it differently, the difficulty curve is upside down. They give you a tiny ass little health meter in the beginning that embiggens after you beat every boss, and you also gradually collect an absurd arsenal of over-the-top weaponry that range from harmless chafe grenades to a portable surface-to-air missile launcher. But bottom-loading player abilities and strategies is a pretty good idea for most interactive adventures out there, particularly because people don't want to be showing off all of their game's tricks too early. After all, you start out every Zelda game with only 3 hearts and no sword, but by the end of those games, you're pulling arrows and hookshots out of your butthole like it's nothing. But you should also notice that in the early stages of these games, the first few sets of enemies and obstacles are disproportionately easy. One of this game's biggest faults is that it top-loads difficulty. Just take a look at the first room. This early in the game you die after a couple shots, but before you can even learn how to crawl properly, they smack in a very lethal adversary in your way that you're probably gonna die from before you even know what you did wrong. In fact, the first 2 sneaking rooms of the whole game are some of the most challenging. Check this out. After you get past the closest thing resembling a tutorial level, you're suddenly thrown out into a little mini sandbox of sneaking possibilities, with more ways to both get caught by and sneak past these guards than anywhere else in the game. Seriously, the guards can find you by puddles, searchlights, snow footprints, and security cameras. You've got some chafe grenades lying around to make it past the cameras, and some stun grenades to knock out the guards. And there's also a pistol hidden in a truck that you could easily miss. There are multiple entryways forward, multiple ways to get caught, and multiple ways to sneak by. But if you zoom out a bit, you may notice that no other place in the game is designed like this. You never need to worry about any other searchlights, puddles, or snow footprints for the whole game. All these obstacles are top-loaded on you in the very beginning when you're unprepared and under-equipped. And actually, the game only gets easier from there on out. Once you're past this big non-linear area, the game's a straight shot, with a lot less guards and more hiding places too. Especially when you find the cardboard box, which functions as a portable hiding spot. It's a good thing that box is so good at fooling guards, and it's a cool little bit of visual comedy as well. Snake's cartoony sneaking mechanics lead to cartoony guard AI, and though personally I can deal with this problem pretty well, reviews of the time were pretty harsh about it. Guards in Metal Gear follow some very strict rules, and they glance away from their robotic patrol routes in very fixed, timely intervals. Their behavior can be better described as interactive than intelligent, and allows for some pretty crazy trick gameplay like this wacky Japanese guy who's taking advantage of it. In practice though, it makes for some pretty grating replays. These games require a lot of patience to wait for guards to casually patrol out of your way, but I'd forgive you for thinking that Snake's fast, snappy movements mislead you into thinking that its stealth system is more arcadey than it actually is. I guess that's just one example of the problem that boils down Metal Gear Solid's entire sneaking system. It's actually pretty shallow, and it's awfully two-dimensional. In fact, most of your movements and actions are broken down into 2 dimensions right there in front of you in the little radar screen. You're better off just looking at that thing than you are the whole screen. Especially since the camera is so super zoomed in that you often can't see who you're sneaking past or what you're shooting at. And that's another thing, games got bad combat. I guess that's kind of expected in a stealth game. After all, isn't that one of the genre's defining features? But I mean, whatever, you just can't see what you're shooting at. You have to rely on Snake to auto-aim at bad guys that are out of the frame. And this was never a problem in the 2D games where you could literally see everything important all at once. And again, it's a stealth game, so complaining about bad combat isn't really appropriate since you're not supposed to get caught, but Metal Gear Solid forces the bad combat on you. Like the section where you have to climb up the 2 towers. Seriously, does anyone remember this shit? Go back and play it, please. You have no choice but to shoot or grenade your way through these guards. And it's too damn bad that the auto-aim doesn't account for elevation, cause for 10 whole flights of stairs, you're almost always getting shot at by guards from the 2 directions that Snake can't aim at. Oh, look at this. You press the shoot button and just look at what he does. This is outrageous. Why do they make you go through all this? You can't avoid some of these hits. Seriously, you better wish you saved up your rations just to make it past these guards, cause you just gotta brute force your way through it. Lay mines behind you and just spasm shoot your way up, cause you can't do this elegantly. And then you finally get to the top, the helicopter shows up, you rappel down, and god damn it, you gotta climb up another tower. Except this time it's turrets instead of guards. So instead of being screwed out of your rations, you get screwed out of chaff grenades, unless you have neither. In which case you literally just have to stop playing and start it over from hours and hours earlier. Is bullshit level design like that? You know, later on after the furnace, they put turrets and mines in places where you've been trained not to expect them, with a jammed radar to boot. There's literally no way you could have seen them coming unless you just ran into them and triggered them. It's bullshit. And you know what else is real bullshit? This boss right here. That boss is bullshit. This wolf cave is bullshit. The pacing is also bullshit. The longest sections of uninterrupted gameplay are actually lengthy backtracking segments. First you go back for the sniper rifle and then you go back for the PAL card. Why, oh why, do I seriously have to heat up and cool down this key card? Who thought that would make the game more fun? What's even more offensive is that you have to do so much climbing up and down for this backtracking. By the time you're done fiddling with this keycard, you will have gone up and down these ladders 7 times. It's insane. It's a serious waste of time. I don't get it. It's like they just ran out of new areas to stage these important codec conversations in, so they just force you to run through old areas to hear new plot twists. And this is probably the most glaring example of why people hate on this game for having a story that imposes on the gameplay. Replaying this section again isn't fun. In fact, replaying the whole game isn't fun in a lot of ways. The gameplay itself is grating and contradictory, full of backtracking and shoddy stealth mechanics. But it's a classic title that's still entertaining, despite how it sacrifices gameplay for story. And that change in priorities influenced the rest of the whole industry. For better or worse, single-player games now move like movies. They talk to you and they make you watch instead of play, while considering both activities as part of the same entertainment package. This legacy is a problematic one with a problematic start, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy the hell out of replaying Metal Gear Solid both times I just now did. Every time, though, I notice that the game itself is something that I impatiently try to rush through. And the story aspect to it, which is arguably the movie half of these discs, is something I always end up slowing down and relishing. And when you think about it, a lot of the best games out there are kind of flawed in some underlying, fundamental way. Metal Gear Solid made sacrifices to achieve its brilliance, and managed to entertain, move, and mentally prod us in ways that other games hadn't or couldn't for decades. That's one thing I can forgive it for, and that's also the same thing that I can really applaud it for too.